On July 2nd, 2024, Six Flags and Cedar Fair officially merged, retaining mostly Cedar Fair leadership, but keeping the Six Flags name. This process was predictably going to be quite rough, as the new company reorganized itself and made financial decisions that wouldn't resonate with consumers. And immediately, they did just that, closing and demolishing Kingda Ka without warning at the end of the 2024 operating season for Six Flags Great Adventure. While novelty, record-breaking coasters aren't really my thing, it was still a historic attraction with a notable presence in the industry, and if there had been any official communication about its closure, I definitely would have made the trip to experience it. While the coaster was known to be unreliable and expensive to operate, there was never any real indication that this was going to occur, and predictably, the lack of communication was met with a lot of outrage. At the very least, the new Six Flags learned their lesson, or at least appeared to do so, as they announced that after its operating season in 2025, Six Flags America would be closing permanently, at least giving people one last chance to experience it. And so, that's what I did, taking a short trip to Maryland where I spent a day in Baltimore and another few days in Washington, while also getting the chance to experience this park for the first and last time. I wanted to know, what about Six Flags America made it an underperformer that management felt the need to close it? And since their communication was clear, what was it like inside the park, knowing that it's on borrowed time? The experience was definitely an interesting one, walking an empty park that essentially exists as a time capsule of the late 90s, which perhaps wasn't doing it any favors, really revealing how mismanaged Six Flags has been over the past 2 decades. So today, I wanted to bring you with me into the sad and final days of Six Flags America, a park that, knowing it's on the verge of death, made for a fascinating experience. Hey, just a quick favor, but videos take a lot of time and money to produce, so if you would like to support the channel, you can do so by just simply leaving a like. The first impression of the park is quite surprising, as its colonial entrance structure is quite distinct. It then leads into the park's first land, Main Street 1776, which seems really ambitious for a Six Flags park. Over near the bathrooms on the left, there is a recreation of the Liberty Bell, and while the buildings are not detailed to the extent that you would find in something like a Disney park, there's still a lot more here than I anticipated. Walking through the colonial facades, listening to the old patriotic marches, I was really impressed by the quality of this area, and wondered what this had been before Six Flags took over. I was surprised to learn that this opened as an attraction known as the Wildlife Preserve in 1974, which allowed people to drive through the property to view animals in their own cars. It closed 2 years later as a financial failure, and after a few changes in ownership, reopened in 1982 as Wild World, adding some small kids rides and water slides, in addition to keeping the animal exhibits, which guests could view from a train ride. It appears that the animals quickly disappeared, either in 1983 or 1984, but throughout the decade, a few other small rides were added, but most of the focus was on expanding as a water park, which became its primary draw. However, in 1986, the park would make a notable addition with the Giant Coaster, a historic wooden roller coaster that opened in 1917 at Paragon Park in Nantasket Beach, Massachusetts. After a few fires that burned down parts of the track and subsequent rebuilds, the layout had changed over the decades, but finally having been sold to Wild World, the name was changed to the Wild One, which it still retains up through the park's closure today. After financial struggles in the late 80s, the park was sold to an amusement park operator known as Tierco Group Incorporated in 1992, which then changed its name to Premier Parks in 1994, which also saw the rebranding of the park as Adventure World the same year. Premier continued investing by adding new rides and even themed areas, turning this into a nice little American-themed park. but in 1998, Premier purchased Six Flags and took on their name due to its strong brand identity. For its 1999 season, Adventure World then became Six Flags America, rebranding the park with that American theme because of its close proximity to Washington, and debuting Main Street 1776. I didn't really expect something so well themed out of Six Flags, but I think it's easy to forget that standards were higher in the 90s, as they tried to compete with Disney. If you watched my video from a while back on Six Flags Great America, the park that they acquired in Illinois from Marriott in 1984, then you'll remember that it too had an American theme, with various lands reflecting different regions. When I wrote that video, I was surprised to learn that Six Flags added Southwest Territory to the park in 1996, which is a relatively well-themed western area that still exists today, even if the rest of the park has declined in terms of theming. However, back over at Six Flags America, in addition to Main Street 1776, it retained Coyote Creek, a western-themed area opened by Adventure World, and other areas were rethemed to Nantucket, Old Boston, and where the Wild once sat, that itself became known as Southwest Territory, which seemed a bit redundant when it already had a western area. It wasn't until 2014 that this was rectified, and the area became known as Mardi Gras, adding in Raging Cajun, a spinning wild mouse that was moved from the Mardi Gras area at Great America. However, while it is interesting to see the park get some decent theming, Six Flags couldn't help themselves and immediately began to vomit Looney Tunes and DC superheroes all over the place. The former kids area known as A Day at the Circus in the Wild World days became Looney Tunes Movie Town with the 1999 Six Flags rebrand, along with Gotham City, a brand new land with a Batman stunt show and a launched coaster manufactured by Premier Rides as the Joker's Jinx. This was followed in 2000 by an Intamin hypercoaster, Superman Ride of Steel, and finally Batwing in 2001, a Vekoma Flying Dutchman coaster notable for its rare flying train type. Past this though, the park received very little investment other than moving Iron Wolf from Great America to here in 2012, leaving a park that felt stagnant and very much stuck in the 90s up through today. My experience with Six Flags America was interesting, as the day that I flew in, I actually visited the park in the afternoon after a spontaneous decision to buy tickets, despite it being only open a few more hours. This was a pretty good decision as the park was a ghost town, and I did all of the major operating coasters and took some time to film in only 2.5 hours. I did visit the next day to finish filming the park with different sunlight, but due to the park's small size and lack of attendance, everything was essentially a walk-on. With that said, the park's only notable rides are its coasters, and even those are all pretty forgettable. I started first by walking through Steamtown, a 2024 steampunk re-theme of the former Coyote Creek. It's interesting from an aesthetic standpoint, even though the changes to the western town are minimal, and it's clear that selling the park wasn't a consideration until the merger, or else the re-theme wouldn't be so recent. It saw the addition of a Zamperla Nebulaz known as Steam Whirler, and the former Renegade Rapids, which is a raft attraction that had riders traversing the Colorado River, was rethemed as Quantum Canyon Rapids, bringing in a strange time-traveling theme and adding in animatronic dinosaurs. The idea of a steampunk western town is a really interesting re-theme for what must have been a tiny budget, and I think that it was done really well for what it was. However, in the back of the land, it also contains Professor Screamore's Skywinder, a Vekoma suspended looping coaster that was installed in 1995 as the first Mind Eraser, that was later cloned far too many times. My first Vekoma SLC was actually pretty recent, as I rode Infusion at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. But for as rough as that was, it couldn't have prepared me for how bad Skywinder rode in comparison. There's a reason that these coaster models have an awful reputation for the rough trains that whip you around violently, and that's about all there is to say about this coaster. Once Six Flags America closes, I can't really see this being moved to another Six Flags park or even being sold, because I can't imagine why any park would want one of these in this current day and age. Moving on to the Chesapeake, a slight name change and retheme from the original Nantucket. This area contains Roar, a Great Coasters International wooden coaster that premiered in 1998, right as Six Flags was incorporated into Premier Parks. Perhaps at one point, Roar was an excellent ride, but in the state that I experienced it, it's best described as having teeth-shattering roughness and is one of the worst wooden roller coaster experiences that I've ever had. As with Skywinder, there's not much to say other than it will leave you with a lot of pain. Also in this area is Firebird, which premiered at Six Flags Great America in 1990 as the historic Iron Wolf. It was the first coaster ever produced by B&M. It was notable for its stand-up trains. And while it gained a reputation for its painful ride experience as the industry continued to get better, it was still extremely innovative and considered relatively comfortable for the time that it premiered. In 2012, it was relocated to Six Flags America and opened as Apocalypse, obviously with an apocalyptic theme, and as it travels through an S-bend at the end of the course, there was a novelty fireball effect that confronted riders, which I think is pretty fun. It was rethemed and repainted again for 2018, where it became Firebird, replacing the stand-up trains with floorless sit-down cars. While the history of Iron Wolf is significant, and so I was excited to ride this even if it wasn't in its original form, I think I've actually discovered the only B&M coaster that I just do not like. Personally, I am very much a fan of the aggressive B&M loopers from the 90s, and while a lot of people complain about roughness and head bopping on the over-the-shoulder restraints, in my opinion, it's more of a skill issue with knowing how to ride them. With Firebird though, because it was the first B&M ever, you can tell by riding that its design is unrefined, and its quick transitions often bop your head into the restraints in a way that you can't really prepare for. I'm glad to have experienced a piece of coaster history, but B&M very quickly improved from this, making it another painful dud in the lineup of Six Flags America. Speaking of coaster history, by moving on to the Mardi Gras area, it contains two coasters that I already mentioned. Unfortunately, Raging Cajun was not operating when I was there, and I suspect won't reopen, but the Wild One was actually a positive highlight of the park experience. To reiterate, this coaster dates back to 1917 as a product of the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, and I find that old wooden coasters have a lot of charm with their often awkward layouts. The Wild One is a down and back coaster that extends out past Firebird and moves through a skull structure that originally framed the Typhoon Sea coaster, which was actually just an intimate log flume. I also thought it was interesting to point out that as the train moves through the helix at the end, the entire track shifts and sways in a way that looks concerning, although I know it is still structurally sound, it is a symptom of its antiquated design. Still, for being as old as it is, the Wild One is a unique experience that was notably less rough than the other coasters, and it's just a classic that I hope gets relocated to a park that wants to take care of it. Moving on to the back in Gotham City, the stunt show is closed, and except for two flat rides, Wonder Woman Lasso of Truth and Harley Quinn Spinsanity, there's just not much here. The last operating coaster that I experienced was at the back of the land, and is the 1999 LIM launched Premier coaster known as Joker's Jinx. From its age and the loud rattling sound that the trains make as they launch, I anticipated that this would be, yet again, another painful coaster in the park's lineup, and yet I was pleasantly surprised. You're launched out of the station into an intimidating looking spaghetti bowl with 4 inversions, but the experience is far less intense than it looks. In fact, it rode so smoothly and the inversions were so mild that I would almost describe the experience as pleasant, if not a bit casual. Maybe it's because I anticipated a lot of pain that was never there that leads me to like this coaster quite a lot, but it was just fun and considerably more comfortable than I thought it would be, making this the standout operating coaster of the park. You might be wondering though, what about Superman or Batwing? Well, while I really wanted to experience these, the park seemed to be barely functioning with half of the attractions closed. So let's talk about the weird, eerie ghost town that is the experience in the last days of Six Flags America. Walking to the back of Gotham City and seeing barricades blocking the path to Superman and Batwing, it was strange to observe an A-frame that specifically stated that all attractions past this point were closed because they were waiting on parts from the manufacturers. I mean, you really just have this very specific sign just ready to go? It's just odd, especially since the day before, the barricades ended at Joker's Jinx, closing off Wonder Woman and a slide attraction themed to the Penguin. When I was able to get as close as I did to at least get footage of Superman's lift hill, I was confronted by a park employee who yelled at me and insisted that I couldn't take photos of closed rides. Even though I was standing in an area that I was definitely allowed to be in, I asked why, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said that his manager said that people couldn't do it, and then he just walked away. I thought to myself, isn't this park closing permanently in just a few months? I'm surprised that anyone could be bothered to enforce an arbitrary rule in such a bizarre interaction. Having walked the park for 2 days, half the attractions were closed, which honestly didn't surprise me, but the abandoned, quiet atmosphere was almost eerie. Walking down Main Street 1776, the music loop was a series of patriotic American marches, all of which cut off and ended abruptly, going silent for a few seconds before another song would begin. Walking through Steamtown, I tried to walk into a saloon-style building that sold food, but closing the door as I saw that nobody was inside, the door handle literally fell off, which I could not have planned better to reinforce the narrative of this video. Shows would have posted times, but A-frames would tell you that they were cancelled for the day, and Looney Tunes characters would come out to meet people that weren't there, and would instead dance to the music that echoed in the empty streets. Walking up to the go-karts, I could hear the engines and smell them spitting out exhaust fumes, yet the attraction was clearly not open, so why were they even running? The park was just a bizarre operational mess, a place that knows it's closing and treats the operation like nothing really matters, which is actually what I expected. Walking through the Emporium at the front of the park, it was surreal seeing that quintessential 1990s color contrast of teal and purple, with store shelves framed by big fiberglass Looney Tunes characters and DC superheroes. Hearing the quiet but energetic jazz of Looney Tunes episodes playing from speakers overhead, I was reminded that 20 years ago, hordes of excited families would be running through here, having spent the day in the park after getting a good deal on cheap tickets by scanning the barcode from the promotional offer on the back of a can of Coke. Walking through Looney Tunes Movie Town, you can see how this park is stuck in time, still existing in that era where Time Warner and Paramount got into the theme park business to deliver brand synergy, while never really understanding what it was about Disney and Universal that made them untouchable. Six Flags America is a fascinating time capsule that stopped seeing meaningful investment past 2001, and I have to wonder why. If another operator purchased this park and tore out the bad coasters, they would have the bones for a really solid American-themed park. It actually reminded me a lot of the proposed Disney's America theme park in Virginia, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Six Flags actually probably did do a soft adaptation of that idea here. Even so, I think it's bizarre that the park received so little investment because the area surrounding Washington and Baltimore is so dense. Sure, Virginia and North Carolina have a good handful of competing parks to the south, along with Pennsylvania to the north, but the population of Maryland and this region of the country could have still supported a greater Six Flags park with larger, better rides and more focused development. It's actually surprising that Six Flags America was overlooked by the company and left so much money on the table, but I did find it fascinating to ride some of the coasters and walk the park, as it is instead that nostalgic time capsule from a more optimistic era. I enjoyed visiting and hope that it made for an interesting video, looking into the last days of a Six Flags park doomed to close. So again, if you would like to support this video or the channel, you can do me a favor by just leaving a like. As always, if you haven't subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.